Well, not really sorry. Good for you.
Welcome. Welcome to tonight's, it's the Thursday, February 8th, Envision Yountville Town Advisory Group meeting. And thank you for being here and for listening on the cable. If you're here, there's information to your right on the agenda and other items that we'll be discussing tonight. So let's move forward. Roll call.
Right. Alternate Member Pena?
Here.
Alternate Member Hudson?
Here.
Member Santos?
Here.
Member Johnson?
Here.
Member Howard?
Here.
Member Chalmers?
Here.
Member Bradigam?
Here.
Vice Chair Dennington?
Here.
Chair Knight?
Here.
Let the record show that Member Wickers and Member Diver McAvoy are both excused, and so alternate members Hudson and Pena will both be voting members this evening.
Okay. Thank you. So let's move to item 3, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item 4 is the adoption of the agenda. Are there any questions or comments or changes the advisory group has? Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So move adoption.
A motion, is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Item 5 is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. If there's anyone in the audience that has a comment unrelated to a specific discussion item tonight, then please come forward.
Pam Reeves, 6887 Jefferson Street. I've just been doing catch-up looking at your videos, and I had just one comment on your, I think it was the December meeting where you were talking about the massing component of trying to make sure that taller buildings weren't obtrusive. And I understand the concept of the architectural version of massing, but one thing that I wonder if you would consider is for the neighbors' rights to light and air movement in this idea of allowing taller buildings, because I think looking forward, solar energy is still a big thing in California and hopefully will remain that, and that there should be something in there with protection to light and access to air movement. So I just wanted to ask if that could be considered in your massing, whatever that's going to be, in the design element or whatever.
Sandra, do you have just a quick comment, maybe just, or anything that you could comment on that now, or?
Not really prepared for that. When it comes to light and air, there's no legal protection for that. So if there's something that we want to incorporate in the general plan, it's worth noting as a policy if that goes above and beyond the height and massing issues that we've discussed, certainly in connection with the greater and greater use of solar on residences.
Okay, thank you. Pam, if you have an opportunity, maybe a suggestion would be maybe to contact Sandra to maybe give her a little bit more information about your thoughts on this item, and then please email staff or email members of our group so we can follow up with it. So thank you for your comment. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public comment period, and we'll move on to item 6, which is our regular items. And maybe just before we get to this, I wanted to note, and maybe Nathan, you could speak to it in terms of the letter we received from Liz. We have a member that'll be leaving the board soon, and we're sorry to see you go, Liz, but we wish you well. But I was wondering if staff could just explain to, in terms of our next few meetings, how losing a member will affect our voting and our discussions.
Right. So first off, we'll all incredibly miss Member Hauer and her, not just her vote, but also her great opinions and input on this whole process. For the next meetings, when Member Hauer will not be present and not be a member of the advisory group anymore, we will still have alternate members. And just to continue on the process, they'll just be just like an alternate member will be alternating as to who is the full member at that meeting. If ever one other full member is absent, then both would be voting members. This will likely just be that one and then two, then one and then two for the remaining 2 or 3 meetings that we have left.
Okay, good. Any members have any questions about that process, or? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll also send an email out to the group just outlining the next few meetings, who will be the voting member, and just how the logistics of all that will work.
Okay, good. Thank you. So our first item is approval of the January 11th, 2018 meeting minutes. Are there any committee members that have any questions or changes to those minutes? Seeing no comment, no questions, then is there a motion to approve the January 11th meeting minutes?
So moved.
It's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The motion passes. Meeting minutes are approved. So the next item we'll move to is a discussion, as the agenda says, a discussion and possible adoption of the draft general plan vision statement. And so I just have, Carl has some comments, but I just had a quick, just a few quick comments to make. I wanted to thank, so we had a subcommittee of Carl and PJ that worked on an idea. I attended one of the meetings, but they had actually spent at least a couple meetings working on it. I wanted to thank them. But we also received suggestions from 2 other members, and I know because I'd seen an earlier draft that one of the versions of the vision statements was from Verlin, and I appreciate your offering and presentation. But I don't know who the second member was. Thank you, Davio. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So we have 3 items that are on here, and what I think I'll do is first we'll just open it up for Carl to discuss the subcommittee's discussion points, and then maybe we'll just open up generally for some general comments from the committee on all 3 statements and some of your thoughts, and then we'll bring it back to the group. So, Carl.
Thank you. So, when I took a look at the alternative vision statements and then some other comments I received from different TAG members, it occurred to me that there are a lot of different views on what our vision ought to be. And to me, the vision was, what does Yountville look like 20 years from now? And I think that's pretty solid in everybody's mind. But then when you read the 3 statements, and like I say, several other comments I got, one of the pieces I noticed that was missing was the tourist. Because, let's face it, the tourists are the goose that's laying our golden eggs. Okay? Without the tourist, Yountville loses 70% of its revenue. Without 70% of the revenue, it's got to lose 70% of its expenses, and that pares us down to a very small community and only able to do a very small amount of stuff. So, from my perspective, this is me only, okay? You have to include the tourist in your vision. This is, what does Yountville look like 20 years from now, okay? Well, 20 years from now, we better to hell still have some tourists here. And so we have to include them in whatever we say, this is the picture we're painting. And with that in mind, I thought about, well, why do the tourists come here? That's really what's important. The tourists are here because they're spending money. We love that. Thank you very much, tourists. But the bottom line is, why do they come here? And I think I've made mention of this before to a couple of you, okay? But when I got on the Envision committee, I started using my time at the visitor center. I do 4 hours a week, as well as talking to people in the street saying, why are you here? What brings you to Yountville? What draws you here? And inevitably, the people who have never been here before have heard about how nice it is, heard about how great the restaurants are. They're coming to Napa for the wine, but they're coming to Yountville because the restaurants are good, but it's it's such a neat place. The returnees were far more specific. I come here because I love walking down the streets and talking to the people. It's us. We're the reason the tourists are coming here. So we have to be in that vision along with the tourists. But I think we need to carry it one step further. As you guys think about everything we're going through here, you got to think about, all right, why did I come here? Some of us were born here, I think. Some of us came here as tourists and fell in love and stayed. Got to the point where he said, I want to be on the tag because I care about this town. So it's all kinds of in between. But as you think about where the tourists fall into our picture, think about what drew you here and what drew your next door neighbors here. Because many of the residents 20 years from now, I think, will be today's tourists. So with that in mind, I think I've already talked ad infinitum about the vision statement that PJ and I crafted. We've been through this now several times. We went back and forth numerous times. Then we had a meeting with Eric. The three of us modified it slightly. So what you see here is a slightly modified version of what we started with. So with that, I turn it over to everybody else.
Okay, just one moment real quickly. Thank you. Are you finished? Yeah. I wanted to ask, PJ, do you have any comments about the subcommittee's presentation? Any other thoughts?
I definitely support everything that Carl said, and I will say that the meeting that we had where you were with us, Eric, we also took into context the other comments that had been submitted, the other versions, to try to make sure that we were weaving in, the ideology into the vision statement that we came up with. But something else, the vision statement, we wanted it to be not too lengthy and verbose, and something that was very clear, that really would serve as kind of a good, almost like an opening summary of what would be presented within the general plan.
Thank you. Berlin, do you have any just a presentation, small discussion of your offering, and then we'll follow with Davio?
Sure. In reading the first statement that was originally presented to us, I really didn't have a major problem with that statement. I liked a lot of parts of it. I felt like it leaned with a little bit of bias here and there. I didn't have the luxury of having the feedback from the other statements that were made other than just that. So I took it and divided it into sections and kind of did headings for myself about what I thought they were trying to cover and tried to trim it down some to a little shorter and also take some of the things that felt a little biased out of it. I thought that one of the things that we were trying to do here, at least one of the reasons that I wanted to participate here, was to really create an attitude of balance between all the different things that influence our town. And also as I was trying to write it, I was trying to think about what I would want to say to people, what I do say to people about why I live here and why I enjoy living here as someone who's been here for a while, and my parents were here for a very long time and died here. So what is it as a resident that really attracts me to being here? The other thing I felt about the top statement is you had mentioned a list, Carl, when you were talking a couple sessions ago, that you started by going through and looking at what a vision statement was supposed to be. And I thought that list was very good. I thought what you put up, it seemed to make sense to me. And I thought that one of the things on that list, if I remember correctly, was that it was to have some emotional impact. This statement, it's lofty. It's to paint a picture. It is to be colorful. And I felt like the statement that was proposed originally, or the replacement statement that was proposed, didn't quite capture the emotion that I would like it to capture, something that really drew you in. Factually, it was absolutely spot on, but I felt like we're doing a lot of the detail stuff in the rest of what we're creating, but I felt like the vision statement should be something that was colorful and drew people in and was just that, a vision, a picture, something that emotionally would ring true to people. So that was the goal, to put it in that context. So I made some attempts at putting that together, and and in the first statement there were times when things were duplicated. They were said a couple times. I tried to limit that, trim it down to where things were just said once, and make a lot of things just as inclusive and balanced as possible. That was the goal.
Thank you. Davio, you have a few
Well,
comments about your
Is this
presentation?
on, by the way?
I think you're on, yeah, I can hear you.
Something bad with this. So I definitely didn't want to overthink this. Mine is the middle one, and as you can see, it's not really meant as a vision statement per se. It's just when I read the first one, which by the way I had no real problem with, I just thought there were a few things missing. So these were meant to be more like talking points, and perhaps some could be interjected into a vision statement. But to be very honest, you know, I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on this. I think each one of us feel pretty much the same way about how we see the community. I did want, because of how I feel about this town and sort of the future, I wanted something to be put about the historical context of our agricultural lands. I wanted something about sustainability going into the future, because I think that's really a driver for the future. But as far as a vision statement, mine certainly isn't. It just interjects a few points that I thought were missing. So take it or leave it. It really doesn't matter that much to me. I just wanted these items at least looked at because I saw them missing. Whether or not they make the final cut, it's poetry, you know. It's all poetry.
Thank you. So I think what would be nice is just to hear from the different members about their thoughts, any suggestions, if there's suggestions for changes, or I guess one of the things I want to do tonight is we still have a fairly large agenda that it would be nice to get people's perspectives on what they see or what they feel about it. I don't think we want to spend tonight kind of wordsmithing a whole new statement. If there was concerns across the whole board, then maybe we would figure out a process to continue the wordsmithing and then bring it back. But your thoughts?
I might be going backwards a little bit, but just to kind of clear, because each one says things a little bit differently, and my question is, where is this going? To whom is it going to? Because that kind of dictates my thoughts on what we need to say. Who are we saying it to? Who is going to be reading this? What venue? How far is it going to go? To how many people? To me, that colors a lot of the different aspects to it. So I just like some clarification from my own thinking on that.
So the vision statement will be in the introduction of the general plan, and it's there in order to really kind of set the vision for everything that follows in the plan. So who's going to read it? Anybody who reads the general plan, but it is kind of front and center in the beginning of the plan. And the point is, it really is to kind of inform all of the goals and policies that follow. Kind of just sets the stage for the rest of the plan.
Thank you.
Other comments?
I really appreciate everybody doing this work. It's certainly people put a lot of work into it, and I, again, really like what PJ and Carl put together, but I also think that some of the words and concepts that Davio has put in in the first line, that citizens respect and embrace the agricultural culture and lands that surround us. I think it's important to get the word agriculture in there somewhere, if that's possible. And I also like the idea in line 3 of together we're proud of our historic heritage, and somehow getting that phrase of historic heritage somehow in there, integrating that in a little bit. But again, the first one seems to express what we are all kind of thinking, but just with some accents, maybe a little salt and pepper.
Other thoughts?
I think that could probably be done by maybe expanding on one of the bullet points or adding another bullet point in the first statement that encompasses agriculture, and just making sure that we have fully outlined the historic heritage character. I think we mentioned something, but maybe not enough about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Boyd?
I'm not sure which version we're going to go with here, but whatever the final draft is, I want to make sure that veterans are mentioned as part of the community. I think the very bottom one does mention veterans briefly, which that's great. And then also, again, I don't know which version we're going with, but if we're going to mention world-class restaurants and wines, kind of speaking for Whitney at this point, I think she'd like to see retail listed as an attraction.
You could also add art.
Mm-hmm.
No. I think you almost have to say, world-class destination for multiple cultural.
Either list them all
or find a word that works for
something that encompasses everything. Yeah.
Well, I think the third proposal, where it talks about this is a safe place with quiet streets, quaint shops, delightful art, that all kind of comes into play, and those are the things that in the parks that we were looking for. And I agree with you about the veterans.
Thank you. Any other comments or? Well, let me throw out I will actually open up to the public in a moment. Pam, I appreciate one. I just have one comment that may be a little bit a combination of what everybody's saying and maybe a different way of looking at this. I appreciate all the work that Davio and Verlin did, and the work that was done by the subcommittee. I almost feel like there's a place for two statements in our general plan, and I see a place like almost, and I thought of it too as when I was thinking about this, as Joel said, we really don't know the structure of the document yet. We're still kind of in that process, but I could really see a place where Verlin's statement could be almost a preface of a book, that what would 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if someone was opening up the general plan, I feel like almost we want them to feel what we feel and why we're here, because as Davio said, these statements are poetic. And they're descriptive of our community, and I think there's been some good suggestions about potentially adding. But I almost see this longer statement being a preface to a document, something that may be the first thing that someone reads that 20 years from now or 15 years from now gets a feel for what the community is as we were working on our general plan update. But I also, in the document, see a significant value for the work that PJ and Carl and I did, because I think it speaks to, and Carl made this statement like, vision statements are usually short. He threw out the idea for like the human rights campaign, it's equality for all. It's something that's short, that gives someone an idea. And what I like about the statement from the subcommittee is it struggles with what we struggle with, and what I'm sure 5, 10, 20 years from now, these contrasts in the community and the bullet points of how we're here, but we have these contrasts that describe our community, that affect our community. And so I almost see, so my short answer for my suggestion I have is that we have a statement that's descriptive, that's poetic in the front, and as the document opens, when we talk about it, there's a place for a vision statement. Then the vision statement talks about the contrasts, the challenges, this shorter bullet point that explains this. We have a vibrant tourist-based community, economy and community, yet we are a residential community that is both involved with and in love with our town. We are committed to protecting and enjoying our scenic environment, our parks and open space, yet we are still a developing community. So it really speaks to the challenges we have now and in the future. So it's just an idea. I don't know, like as Joel mentioned, how the document will still come together, but I can see a place for both statements.
What brought it to my attention was that it seems to me, and I'm not a wordsmith, so that's why I did not jump into this, but it seems to me we're describing 3 different ways what we have now. We're not, this doesn't to me look at what we are envision for the future. What do we want? Do we want the same thing? Then if we want the same thing of what we have now, then we need to state that because we are envisioning what our community is going to be in the future. And so maybe we need to incorporate in whatever we do that we want this lifestyle as we are describing it to be what we want in the future.
I know for the one that I wrote, I was thinking about that as I wrote it because of what Carl had said in his initial list of things. He said to write it in the present tense. I believe was one of the items, was write it in the present tense as though you were 20 years down the road. So that's what I tried to do when I wrote that. The fact that it sounds similar to what we have now is not an accident, because mostly what we hear is people like what they have now and don't want that to change very much. They want it improved on, but they want it maintained while they have all the other things that happen.
Exactly.
Agreed. I mean, I think that's one of the real challenges of this committee. I mean, we're tasked with trying to understand 20 years down the road. And poetry is only going to take us so far down that road. But when the overwhelming amount of concern in this community is more or less to keep it the same because it's pretty good now, and change is scary to a lot of people. And a lot of people actually don't live here all the time. It's that portion is growing steadily. So I think Verlin's spot on this one. It's really hard for me as a member of the Envision team to really feel like we aren't kind of stuck in the here and now and then maneuvering around the edges and making it as good as we can possibly make it, knowing that a lot of people don't want a lot of changes.
Okay. Let me at this moment, just go ahead and open up a public hearing, as we do on each of these items. As we move through them, we open up the public hearing and then hear from the people that are here, and then I'll close it. So I'll open the public hearing. Is there any comment from the public on this item?
Pam Reeves. I was also in support of what Eric was saying, because as I looked at these vision statements, I felt like the last one was sort of this storybook depiction of what Yountville is, and that it's what people see when they come here. But I think there is room for all of that what Eric was suggesting, I think that deserves a place somewhere in the document. But as far as the other two go, I think they actually work hand in hand. I was thinking that the second vision statement is really about forward thinking, who we are and who we view ourselves as, and then the bullet points from the top one sort of set out some of the challenges we face as we are who we are. So it feels like you could combine those two statements and come out with one, eliminate the top two sentences of the first statement, use the proposed second vision statement, and then the bullet points, and you come up with quite a good statement. There are some words that could be changed around, but that's more of a tinkering. But I think they work really well together and actually have a better kind of document feel of what the whole general plan is supposed to be looking at.
Thank you. Is there any other comments from the public? Thank you, Pam. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the committee. Are there suggestions about process here in terms of how we work this, and either if there's a consensus to work on it a little more to bring it back, or to consider one of the statements that are currently before us?
Well, I guess the question is, as this is put together, is the option that you were talking about of having sort of two parts or including two different approaches, is that an option?
Comments from the consultant?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I especially like the idea if you want something kind of poetic in the beginning, and then something a little bit more like the bullet points as the actual vision statements. That's more in the, in the middle of the introduction where it typically is found. I can see, as long as they're not in conflict with each other, and I don't think that they are. But I kind of like that idea. I think the graphic designer would like it too, actually.
Great.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Is there a suggestion that we try to keep each of these statements, find places for all three of them, or try to combine 1 and 2 together and leave 3? Or is there any thoughts in terms of a process, or should we maybe suggest that the subcommittee and maybe some other members join and we have a little more discussion about it? Would you be willing, Davio or Berlin, to join with the subcommittee to kind of review some ideas?
Sure.
I think it'd be something we could do pretty easily to take and kind of manipulate the second piece as the introduction. I kind of like actually what Pam suggested and kind of fit it all together. I think we could do that pretty easily.
So a concept where maybe the first and the second statement may come together, and then the third statement may stand alone at some other place or something in the document.
Yep.
Is there a
I'd
general?
like to see, I think Boyd's right. I think veterans need to be absolutely included. I don't care where, but they do need to be included, so I would.
I think in one of Verlin's first drafts you had mentioned that, but I definitely thought in terms of like, when we're talking about this description, that like on the second line of Verlin's suggestion, that when we talk about our historic buildings, charming neighborhoods, and a welcoming atmosphere, that somehow that we just include and the California Veterans Home, so that it's really an introduction to that. But I was going to make that suggestion if we move forward and kind of craft.
I did have chatting with veterans. The problem was duplication. I was trying to get away from, and length.
I understand.
And then, I did have to, what do they call it, kill your babies. You have some lines you really like, and I did a lot of editing of that, so it didn't end up too long. There was another part of this that I really wanted to put in there, but I tried to leave that alone. So.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Carl, but when we were writing this, originally we did specifically say veterans, but then we decided that we just said our residents, because our veterans are our residents. And, given that we aren't, in control over what happens with the veterans home, we didn't know if we should specifically call that out in the general plan. And so that was why we went with just saying the residents, I think. Is that correct? Yes.
I think it should. I think you could bring it back. So I guess just to confirm, Davio and Verlin, would you be willing to meet with the group to talk about some wordsmithing? And that's great. But I just also think it's important somewhere that we specifically talk about the California Veterans Homes and to state that, because it's really beyond George Yount. I mean, the historic buildings that have come and gone, and the stature of this community really was the Veterans Home for so many years, and they're an important part of our community. So, good.
Saying the four of you meeting, that's great. Don't invite Boyd, because the second you get to 5, then it's Brennick. So keep it to you 4. No offense to Boyd.
So I attended the other meeting where there was 3 of us, so I won't participate. So we'll stay.
There we go.
And at 4, I guess even with with Liz leaving, we're still not in a
9 is the actual number of the body. So 5 is that magic number that you want to avoid. So
well, thank you very much for willing to meet and to try to bring something back, and I appreciate all that you'll do and bring. It'll be an interesting discussion. So thank you. Yes.
What do the 4 that are meeting think of? Can you maybe copy Christine, since she's going to be kind of drafting, and maybe that way when you come back to us, she can separate maybe the 2 different statements. That way we have something maybe we can actually vote on. Does that work, or is that unnecessary? Get some professional guidance, maybe?
Either way, whatever your finished product is, you can send it to me, Christine, or Sandra, any one of us. We're going to share it with each other, and we'll have something prepared for the whole tag at the next meeting.
Yeah.
And maybe just some thoughts you could send back to the smaller group, too, if they do get something to you that you can comment on before it comes back to us. And
sure. If we don't like the font or something, we can.
Right. Something important like that. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is discussion of the land use policies. Staff report? Consultant report? Thank you.
Got it to work. Okay, so we've spent 3 meetings now talking about land use policies. And just when you thought you were done, we had, as everyone will recall, at the end of the last meeting, invited all of the members to send us any additional policies or programs that they wanted to discuss. And we didn't receive any comments. So we didn't flag any of those. But we will kind of, at the end of this portion of the presentation, kind of open it up again if anybody has one last policy or program they want to talk about. We did, however, have a couple of things that we wanted to bring back to you, and they should be pretty quick. So the first thing, wait a minute, let me make sure I got this right. Okay. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was the Veterans Home. And because there was an article in the Yountville Sun about why the tag wasn't addressing the Veterans Home. And so I just kind of wanted to bring this forward and talk about how the Veterans Home is discussed in the general plan. It's also, first of all, there is a program in the housing element. The housing element was adopted in 2015, so it's already in the general plan. And this one talks about working closely with the Veterans Home, also the Department of Veterans Affairs and other parties, to refine concepts for changes and upgrades to the Veterans Home facility as envisioned in the facilities master plan. And then the description goes on to talk a little bit about the 2012 plan. It also describes that the plan itself is envisioning a significant upgrade, improvement of the facilities, and also to the facilities, the living quarters for the veterans, and also to improve and to build new on-site employee housing. And then it says that the town staff will monitor the project, participate in meetings and work groups, and assist in refining and improving plans that benefit the Veterans Homes residents and employees, as well as other Yountville residents and the community as a whole. So I just wanted to kind of flag that and mention that it is currently in the general plan. This is a program that would remain in the general plan. Also wanted to kind of point out that the 2012 master plan is currently 1,120 beds at the Veterans Home, and the plan has a provision to increase that to 1,500 beds. And then also, as I said, to renovate the existing cottages, and the construction was for 129 units of workforce housing, and I believe that's primarily to house their employees there. So there is potential for additional housing on the Veterans Home, and it is recognized in the general plan. We also have a new policy that we added in the land use element, which is the one that we're reviewing now. And but what's underlined here is just some additions that we, upon kind of revisiting this policy, staff decided that we should kind of expand it. So this is a little different than what's in your packet, but essentially it says to work, and it kind of restates what I just said, that's in the housing element, to work with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Veterans Home to support and assist in implementing the existing and future amendments and revisions of the master plan, including the evaluation of workforce housing at the Veterans Home campus. And to the extent allowable, given the town's lack of land use authority on state-owned lands, which of course is an important point that I think we've all talked about before, but the town just doesn't have any authority over the land. So it's really kind of limited to working with the Veterans Home and the Department of Veterans Affairs in order to try to get that housing built. There is also a policy in the open space element about joint use agreements and to maintain existing and enter into additional joint use agreements, including with the Veterans Home for recreation facilities like the community pool. And then there are also some existing policies on the Veterans Home, two in the land use element, and both of these we've just kind of changed a little bit, but essentially they're slightly modified them, but essentially they're the same. One is to support facilities operated by public agencies, including the Veterans Home, and then LU 9.2 about shared services, support shared services and joint use facilities, including the community pool. And then there is another policy that's in the conservation element about Rector Reservoir and maintain agreement with the Department of Veterans Affairs for the long-term use of Rector Reservoir water. I think that is, yes. So those are all of the Veterans Home policies that we have in there. Again, we're kind of limited to what we can put in, but I just wanted to kind of call that out. Is there any questions or comments about the Veterans Homes policies?
Could we include the response to the letter in the Sun from the...
Included in the general plan?
The response from Sacramento that was printed in the paper.
Yeah, next week.
The next
Oh,
week.
I didn't.
It was wonderfully put.
It was.
It was
fantastic.
I didn't see it.
an amazing response, and it it was good. So if you guys want to read that, I would recommend that.
Definitely will. Okay, so I'll move on.
The only other thing I would have in terms of this issue is I know when we get to the, tonight, if we get to the point of discussing the circulation element, that I thought there was some language, and I made some notes last night, it was late, but I would like to, for us to discuss a question in terms of maybe specifically talking about with circulation. Well, one, now that we talk about the potential development there, how circulation in terms of traffic circulation may be an issue, but also in terms of walking and the bicycle path. There was, I think, a discussion about a connection from I think the Veterans Home through to the Veterans Park and into the town, but that maybe we address or discuss an option of some language of supporting an improved pathway, walking and bicycle path from the Veterans Home into town, as the current one, has some limitations. That maybe that would be a point of discussion that we should have and consider adding that to the circulation.
So do you want to discuss that when we get to the circulation element?
We could discuss that. So,
okay. All right.
Because at one of the public meetings, we did have a comment from one of the members of the Veterans Home about a potential wider path and a better path system from the Veterans Home to downtown. And so I'd just like to discuss it then when we talk about that element.
Well, then we'll hold off until we get to circulation. Okay. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was Toyon Terrace. We wanted to bring this back. Now, as you'll recall, I think it was the last meeting or maybe two ago, we had discussed this and the TAG approved this language, and it was essentially consider revising the development standards to allow a higher floor area ratio, FAR, in the Toyon Terrace neighborhood, provided buildings conform to the rules on massing. We wanted to strike that to allow families to grow in their home. So this is the draft program in the general plan. And so staff did some research on this, and we recognize that the homes are small there, and we wanted to kind of look at, we actually wanted to think about, well, what should that floor area ratio increase be, and how will that affect the properties there. So we did crunched a bunch of numbers and looked at all of the properties in Toyon Terrace, and I wanted to share that with you because this might have it might kind of influence or have you reconsider the policy, the program. So Toyon Terrace has 60 lots. They're almost all of them under 8,000 square feet. There's only 2 that are over 8,000 square feet. And the allowable living area, the floor area ratio, there is 0.3. So essentially that means that 30% of the living area of the building, excluding the garage, 30% of the lot area is allowed for a living area. So we looked at all of those 60 homes, and 27 of them currently have a living area floor area ratio of 0.2 or below. So there, a lot of them are actually already well under the allowable FAR. And there are 52 homes that have a living area FAR of 0.25 or below. So that's, and 52 out of 60 is actually a very high percentage. So the average living area of those homes is 1,500 square feet. So we looked at kind of like where they were and what they could do if they just went up to the FAR that's allowed now. So on average, the additional living area potential is 600 square feet. So we're kind of talking about on average taking a 1,500 square foot home and making it 2,100 square feet, and that's allowed under the current development standards. So if we were to increase that to like just a little bit more, an FAR of 0.35, well then what we get is on average the living area potential would increase by 920 square feet. So now we're talking about a home, an average home, that would be 2,420 square feet. So I think, yeah, so we just wanted to kind of like bring that up and have you discuss that? And, do you think that there still is a need, because there's so many homes that are actually under the FAR? It's not like they're already built to the maximum FAR. So there's already some room for them to grow. So we wanted you just to kind of discuss it, and with kind of a fuller appreciation for what this change might do to the neighborhood, how it might look. The other thing too is with the homes that are smaller, it makes them more affordable, and when they get larger, they can become less affordable to kind of lower or moderate income households. So that's something else to think about.
Do you have a general sense, other than obviously FAR, floor area ratio affecting it, also setbacks affect maybe how it's placed? So do you have a general sense, is the rear setbacks farther away so that still that potential growth could occur without changing FAR? Was there room to go back into the yard so it's not into the front setback, or would it in reality be a movement up to get gain the additional FAR?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to defer to Sandra on that one. For the most part, the ground floor plans don't maximize the building envelope, and that would be to take it to the full setback allowance of 20 in the front and the rear and the 5 side to side. And the result is we have more articulation in the building, so there is some room to push out in those areas. There's not a whole lot. So when you're looking at a property that has 600 square feet, they probably can't accommodate that all on the ground floor. So to make it work, they're putting a lot of money into a ground floor addition that's on the small side, or a lot of money into a second floor addition that's really small in comparison to the footprint of the home. In that neighborhood, though, where the 50% rule would apply, we see predominantly one-story homes, so there is an opportunity for second-story additions.
So it would be kind of the option really is maybe the opportunity is to go up. Of course, going up is always a more expensive way to build. So.
Well, it's really case by case. I would say that there is some ground floor expansion potential on all of them, perhaps not as much as the potential average 600 square feet that the lots have, but there is that second floor potential as well.
All right, thank you.
Does Hopper Creek and Heather Avenue, is that considered part of Toyon Terrace? There's a little strip on Heather, you know what I'm talking about? And then
yes.
right in their backyard is Hopper.
So Heather and Holly are both in the Toyon Terrace neighborhood.
Okay. So because there, it seems like there's other parameters to discuss when you talk about Hopper Creek and building back and the offset. So are we not focused there, or is this part of the discussion? Because isn't that a larger issue?
The setback from the creek?
Yeah.
Well, the setback from the creek, again, is one of those factors that establishes the building envelope on the property. Mm-hmm. And I would say as we look at those houses that back up onto Hopper Creek, we're probably looking at the full setback. So there's a little opportunity there.
Okay. That's what
it really is specific as to each individual lot where they have room to go based on the configuration of that ground floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
So this question for staff, I'm slightly confused. The issue here apparently is whether we want to say that we allow a higher floor area ratio in Toyon Terrace to allow room for expansion when they already have room. Is that in a nutshell? Okay.
Yes.
Since this is a general plan and not the detailed specifics, we can say we have room. We're willing to consider something even over a 0.3.
I don't know that we are.
With all else taken into consideration. So the question is, do we want to stick with the 0.3, or do we want to say, hey, we can allow a little wiggle room here? Is that it in a nutshell?
Yes. We wanted to give you numbers to better understand what the 0.3 FAR that is existing met and what a potential addition would mean. And the reason we want to do so is because we would want to try to establish that building intensity in the general plan. We'll have a chart that specifies all the zoning districts, and so we did want to take it a step further and become a little more specific, and when we did so, we took a deeper look at these numbers, and that's what we're sharing with you. We were a little surprised at how much potential there was, and this potential policy came before you based on feedback that we were receiving from some residents, and so we're sharing greater detail.
Yeah, when we took this analysis, first starting with just the neighborhood, but then thought, well, let's take a look at the entire single-family residential zoning district. And after doing that, we found out that only approximately 11% of the single-family residential parcels in town were developed to the full FAR potential there. And so that made us think, let's bring this back to the TAG and share that analysis with them to see if that might have them rethink this policy.
I think it's really helpful to see, because I think the thinking was that we were not allowing growth when people came with ideas, but it seems that if they come with some idea, there is a way for them to do it. And I think we did think that it would be through second-story addition, which will make it a more expensive home, which also sort of goes against a little bit of what we're trying to do, which is to preserve affordability and diversity in the town, and that gives sort of that middle-income diversity. I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised actually, to see this, and would suggest that we don't need that policy, that everything is functioning just fine in Toyon Terrace, and if somebody comes with the desire to expand their home, they have the ability to do it.
Right.
And it doesn't need to, because it would be a striking change to that neighborhood if we increased it to 0.35 FAR, turned these homes in from 1,500 square foot average to 2,400. That's a very, very major change, and would make them from sort of not the smallest homes in Yountville, but the more medium homes to the largest homes in Yountville for a neighborhood if everybody took advantage of the full FAR. I think it would be destructive to the neighborhood.
Not really sure how the massing part of this would also work. Like, let's say these people have to, at the 0.35, I think Liz is correct. I mean, these are going to get much bigger. Knowing what I know about that particular neighborhood, it just seems like it's going to force people to go up, and then only so many of them per massing can go up, and I'm wondering if that doesn't cause more of a problem down the road than really necessary.
I would agree. Race to the top.
Could you remind us what number the policy this is in terms of this document?
Oh.
Page 13.
Yeah, it's on page 13.
Program LU 6.1B, second from the bottom. And I think it's really just, we don't need the policy if we agree that they already have enough permission, latitude to increase size.
I'm wondering, in terms of just sort of language, it's difficult to kind of design this in a committee like this where now we're getting more information. I mean, and so I always think it's better to be more basically conservative in terms of suggestions for the general plan than, and so I do appreciate this information. I'm wondering if we remove this language, this policy, I'm just envisioning in the future with language we have in the document now that we're suggesting in terms of building massing and all that maybe potentially down the road there could be other ideas that staff could look at in terms of we exempt garages. There always could be other ideas that might come forward in the future where you could do some exemptions that allowed maybe some growth without us actually tinkering with FAR right now. I mean, but we do have language where we talk about building massing, and I feel almost as if we should allow the process to go forward where maybe there might be future design ideas that could help people without talking specifically about FAR now. Is there any thoughts in terms of
to avoid, you're seeking to avoid mention of FAR in the general plan, but to build in some level of opportunity for this.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about
neighborhood,
building
or-
massing in terms of, and so we have some direction that staff can look at a project. If we move the language talking about increasing FAR, then it just means down the road that maybe you would potentially, if there was a response from that neighborhood, to look for other ways to allow some growth without this large increase that we're seeing by changing FAR and going from 30 to 35 or 40. All of a sudden, these homes in this neighborhood would get very dense. So there may be other ways in the future that we can't consider now to help people that.
But I think that's what it's saying, is that if we don't put this language in about Toyon Terrace, but we keep the current language that we have in about building massing and creative ideas, which we do have in there, that we are already dealing with that and
we're
saying
encouraging.
that we are already encouraging people to come with ideas for alternatives as new ways of building and solar and sustainability and new ideas and new materials come across, but that we can we don't need to talk about this neighborhood specifically. They have the room to do it, and we have given them permission to come with creative ideas to deal with the idea of massing and limiting the massing, right?
Correct. Liz, thank you. That's what I was suggesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need this policy, but we need to keep in the discussions about creative approaches to massing and second floor and and that's all in there. Yeah.
Right. Any other thoughts from the group?
I would prefer to leave it at the 30%, because I think, first of all, nobody's really acting on it in the neighborhood, which completely surprised me. Secondarily, it keeps those properties in a price range that's affordable for middle-income people or families that are wanting to come to town.
There's always a two-edged sword, and Yountville homes will always get more expensive in the future, but if we have a more expensive in the future starter neighborhood, it's really Toyon Terrace. So they may be 1.2 versus $2.5 million homes, but they'll always
starter
be
houses.
It's all about ratio.
that quote-unquote starter neighborhood for Yountville.
So I think we can.
So is there a general consensus from the committee to remove this item or this policy statement from our matrix?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. Good, thank you.
Okay. All right, so next we also just wanted to kind of quickly revisit Vista Condominium. So we had a discussion about this, and the way we've revised the language is what's underlined here. So consider revising the development standards to allow existing housing units located in the interior ring of Vista condominiums, as shown in Figure X, to add a second story, provided it will not result in a disjointed development and buildings conform to the rules on massing. And then I just wanted to share with you, this would be not the figure, but these are the homes in the interior that we've identified that would be permitted to go to 2 stories. So just kind of wanted to run this by you one last time to make sure that this is reflecting, I believe it does, but that it's reflecting kind of the consensus that we had at the last meeting.
Has anybody talked to the Adventist folks? Since it looks like they're kind of surrounded by your checks.
We haven't, no.
And how about viewshed? I think that's okay. I mean, that's a real concern. Is the viewshed impacted there? It's got to be for somebody, but not against how our committee has somewhat stated. Is that correct? The viewshed's not.
There are no designated view corridors through here, but by selecting this interior ring, there's a recognition that the ones on the exterior create that step-down effect so that those wouldn't all block the interior views.
And the Adventists, if I'm not mistaken, are 2-story.
They are.
Yes.
So
they're right in the middle of it.
At least it would be equality. It wouldn't be that an overshadowing second story on a single story. I think that was the thought process.
There is land buffer.
Yes, there is. There's common area between.
Yeah. I think it's a very good idea.
Yeah.
I think it's very creative.
Okay. Move on?
Good. I guess just in thoughts. So I don't see any problem with the policy, but there isn't any, in terms of from the planners, there isn't any kind of issue with kind of this selective selection, or I mean, this selective choice of homes in a larger neighborhood. There's not an issue of, I don't know what would be a word.
Civil rights, economic civil rights or something.
Yeah, or
the value of my home is now more than the value
Well,
of
as
your
long
home.
as there's a reason and a nexus for the policy, it's something within our power. And I will turn to the neighborhood that's to the north, and we see that those are all one-story homes along that adjoining border, and so it carries on that similar policy, and that's common to neighborhoods that develop as a master plan, such as this one, and the adjoining one, that there's room for different types of houses at different locations.
Okay. So I guess that's what the way I would look at it, in terms of creating some diversity, but it's also respecting the fact that when Washington Park was built, there was an agreement that it would be one story on that, yeah, for those neighbors that were on the north face of in this neighborhood. So okay, good. I just thank you for that explanation.
Okay. All right. So then we'll move on to a new program. And we kind of tinkered with the wording on this. So this is not exactly what shows up in your, this isn't what's in your packet, but the program is on pop-up retail. It says, consider adopting policies that would encourage temporary pop-up retail uses in temporary structures. And just so that we're kind of clear on what we're talking about, we have some photographs of this idea of a pop-up retail. So they are temporary. They're usually, might be seasonal. The idea here is that like these could be used in the lawn area before, in front of the marketplace. It helps to kind of bring a more active streetscape, and again, they could just be temporary or seasonal, and they could be here and then disappear in a short time afterwards. So
my question when I read this, even with the change in the wording, is how does this apply to food trucks? Because especially with the new wording, it could conceivably encourage food trucks.
Well, food trucks are specifically regulated under the zoning ordinance, and they are permitted in commercial zoning districts provided they meet certain requirements. And they're, so I think it's addressed through that.
So they would not be, and then this one doesn't talk about in a commercial area. So I would be terrified to have this program.
we could add that in commercial areas.
I can just see that Shiseido thing popping up in front of my house. You know?
That from Cold Desert.
Right?
And we're looking at the idea that these would occur on private property rather than in parking lots or on the public
That was
right-of-way.
my question,
Yeah.
parking lots.
I think we have to be really careful on this.
I just want to echo what Sandra was just mentioning. I think we do want to clarify, and I have no qualms at all if you want to identify that it's non-food service, non-wine, because part of the goal that staff was listening is how do we potentially add some additional retail. Maybe a vendor wants to come with a farmer's market. We haven't been successful on getting a full market, but as you saw, there's some space on the V Marketplace grounds that could work. But I think I really like the ideas, commercial, non-parking lot, but the question really was just not to go too far into the specific policy, but just to see if this is something, again, it's sort of the out-of-the-box thing that we're trying to get something that could be a more affordable, fill a void. We don't know what it's akin to something like what you see in some of the shopping malls with the center. We don't know. Maybe this is something that will, something we try and it doesn't work. But right now we don't have the ability to do it.
I think it's kind of a neat concept. I guess I would just want to make sure that if we were to adopt some kind of a policy, there would be language or some kind of safeguard around it that it doesn't get, high density and a tremendous number of them, and, that there's keeping it.
Would we also want to have some language about how it should still be in keeping with the look and feel of Yountville? Like, I love the Farm City and hate the Shiseido. But if we don't say it, we
Right.
can end up with Shiseido. I mean, that would be a
Right,
great
right.
one for Napa Valley Film Festival, and they
Yeah.
could say, hey, it's temporary, it's pop-up, it's this and that. But I don't think it's in keeping with what the kind of diversity we would want to see from a plan look.
What is the definition of temporary pop-up? What is temporary? How long?
That would be in the if you could go back to how it's
Sure.
worded there, how it says, consider adopting policy. These specifics, really this just says, yeah, develop these specifics. Create the boundaries that would
Create the
encourage
framework.
these temporary
Okay.
pop-up retails
Yes.
by assigning a definition of
Right.
what is the permitted retail, what is the
Okay.
permitted design, what is
Yes.
the permitted size, and all of that stuff.
There is no standard definition for those.
But we can create a
It could
Yountville
be in a
definition.
policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think about having this as a discussion item in a workshop? I'd like to hear feedback from people, what they would like, because I'm guessing that what did you call it, Shiseido?
Shiseido.
Shiseido.
Cosmetics.
I'm guessing Shiseido isn't real big in this community, maybe it is, but I'd like to hear what other towns, friends of ours, might want if there was such a thing. That might be helpful. I mean, if you hear they really do want a lot of food, it may skew the program just a little bit. So I would like you to consider that as a workshop.
And the next workshop that we have in April is, we are going to be pulling some of the more interesting programs and policies and bringing those forward to the community to get their input on them. And since this is kind of a new one and a fun one, I think this might be one of them that we would include.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Love the idea of the flower shop.
And the temporary structure would then exclude the original concept where we were looking at the Playfields snack shop, because that's a permanent structure.
Yeah, this would be a separate policy from that. While the snack shop at the playfield, that policy said, hey, let's make it open year-round, fun. This one would be, can we allow a pop-up retail to come in on a Saturday and then they're out by Sunday morning? You know, just one of those temporary things or whatever the policy ends up being.
I thought we had said we didn't want that other policy.
The snack shop?
Yeah. I thought we went round and round, it's on the school property, we don't have legislation over it.
It got voted to stay in.
But that would be up to the school, we're saying that we would let
Well, it
them-
would always,
okay.
yeah, the policy
Okay.
was stayed in according to the tag.
Okay.
But we all said, but of course, you need
It's
to
up
work
to
with
the
the
school.
school in order
Okay.
to make that work.
Right, and
I
I
just
think we revised it to say just that, you know, work with the school too. Yeah.
I find it interesting that we're considering additional retail when last time we met, we turned down developing an area in town across from Cindy Gates' office to be retail, and yet we're talking about retail again. So I'm wondering, where do we really want to go with retail, and how much are we going to bring in? If we're encouraging temporary, are we discouraging long-term retail, long-term people coming in? If we don't have the facilities for long-term retail, we can't encourage it. But if we encourage pop-up or temporary, are we then discouraging long-term?
I think the discussion on the proposal that we heard was the location of it, not the idea of additional retail space, but
we're
that it was in
limited-
such a
but we're
residential
limited
area.
on-
And that was my point on here is, like, I would want it very limited on where it could be. And the reason, the ability to have pop-up, it sort of assumes smaller and, you know, fitting into a funny little location that a permanent
But
wouldn't be
that's
able
going to
to.
be everywhere in town, because everywhere in town is going to be next to commercial, and they're going to be next to residential. Almost every place in town is close to that. That property that was available has retail all around it, and it has housing around it, and we're going to be dealing with the same thing. So I'm just wondering, as we look at these policies, we need to be thinking about balancing that, looking at that.
I think a lot of those questions probably would be a part of a discussion that would be brought forward not only by staff but by the community, and I think we've all made some good points. Is there general consensus to support this moving forward with the language says consider adopting policies? Is that flexible enough for the committee, or?
It needs a little bit more for me, to include in commercial area or something like that. I wouldn't be comfortable with just this. I don't think this gets across what we're thinking.
So
this could
are we
be
talking about maybe
a pop-up space in Washington Park. I would not be
Are
supportive
we talking
of
about
that.
then maybe in the commercial core as we describe our
Something,
business
the Washington
core
Park commercial, whatever.
center?
Right. So the policy that, or the program that we could bring up to the next public workshop would say consider adopting policies that would encourage temporary pop-up retail uses in commercially zoned areas and temporary structures, something like that. Is that the
Or maybe
consensus?
specifically the business, our core area, where we're talking about where people are walking and moving around.
Okay.
So,
Provided we make an exception for the Girl Scout cookie stand.
right. Yeah.
That can go next to Carl's house.
And I would encourage, if you really, even though we regulate food trucks, I really think if we don't want this to be intended to offer prepared food, we need to say that, because people will get very creative on what is a pop-up, and it could be a cart, and then they say, I'm not a food truck. So if your intent is, and I would use the word prepared food rather than, like we say, farmer's market, fruits and vegetables, but I just think, that's an area that we've wrestled a lot with, and I think to Joel's point, the challenge we have in Yountville is very unique. We have more retail that wants to come into town. We have residents that want more retail, and I have no place to put retail.
I think the exciting idea about this is it allows innovative ideas for retail to come in and test their success in the community, and then maybe someone that has a place for them says, that's someone I need to bring into my shop or center or something. So does the group feel that we should specifically now say non-food and wine, or non-prepared food and wine, or let that be a part of a future discussion?
Another idea, since I'm hearing relative consensus, you can all shout at me if I'm assuming too much, that we want to bring this to a community workshop.
Yes.
Questions can kind of get around what we're talking about, saying, if you're interested in pop-up retails, what kind of limitations would you be interested in hearing? And using those quick poll devices, we can see overall what kind of limitations, if any, the community would like as regards to the type of retail or the location. Those kind of things can be worked out then after the workshop as we finalize all the policy. Is that?
Yes.
Does that satisfy your concerns?
That's a great idea.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So I hear that there's consensus for the language as presented. Is that correct? Thank you.
Okay. And this was just more of an FYI. We're going to be bringing the policies, mostly land use issues, to the Zoning and Design Review Board on February 13th at their 6 p.m. meeting. And then we are going to be having a council study session in February 27th. It's a 3-hour afternoon meeting from 1 to 4 p.m. So the idea is that we want to bring them, let them see all of our policies and programs, but really kind of focus on some of the land use, kind of the major land use issues before we have our workshop. So 2 of the programs that we've already discussed here on the North Agricultural Parcel and the Humboldt Residential Rezoning, they were both very close votes. They were 4 to 5 that failed. But because they're close and because they're big issues, I just want to let you know that we're planning on bringing both of these forward to the Zoning and Design Review Board for their recommendation. We will, of course, let them know, explain to them what the TAG thought about it and what the discussion was, and then bring that recommendation and the TAG recommendation to the council and have them kind of weigh on it and provide the final direction on those. So one of the changes that we're looking at making is to consider rezoning a portion of the 33-acre north agricultural parcel rather than the entire thing. That might make it, might change kind of the discussion a little bit. So didn't mean to bring this forward to like open it all up for discussion again, but just wanted to kind of advise you of how we're moving forward with the process. So that's
sorry. Could you clarify the ZDRB could change language that the tag is proposing?
No. So what we would do is we would say this is what the ZDR what the tag proposes, and then if the ZDRB has another idea, then we would also bring that to the council, and so that the council can have kind of a full, be fully informed of what its committees are recommending. And then it's, of course, like everything that's up to the council is the final decision is made by the council.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's just someone that's raising their hands up here. So I think in terms of as we've been talking about this, I was going to wait to the end in terms of just public comment, but maybe I'll open it up for comments on this item just at this point. Thank you. Please provide your name and address. Thank you.
Hi, Mike Sikorsek, 1953 Yountville Cross. I was here at the last session, and when I introduced myself, I appreciated the process and how transparent and discussion was here. And on this particular issue, I was reflecting on the past, what I'd heard in the Envision workshop, and then what some of the discussion. I think we talked about this, or you talked about it for about 45 minutes. A lot of really impassioned pleas. And in particular, I was re-encouraged when I was listening to the vision statements of how preserving what we have is the reason we brought the tourists in who stayed and are bringing more. I guess my question is, I walked out of that feeling like there was alignment, and again, I was re-encouraged that the vision and the integrity and the intent of what Yountville was being manifested. But now I'm realizing that that vote doesn't seem to have manifested it in a decision or in a decisive course of action by virtue of it having been revisited again. So it was really a question about the process, because I think I walked away with a sort of a sense of integrity to the process that is now suddenly making me question what we were doing up until this point.
One moment, I just want to come. I think the only thing I would say is that we're all here. There's we've had some very lively and intensive discussion, and there is definitely a lot of sincerity in this process. But we're also, in terms of the process, we're an advisory group. And this is a long process of rewriting the general plan. We're an advisory group that the council, put together to hear from the community, but there'll always be input from other bodies, the Zoning and Design Review Board and the council. So there's opportunities for presentation. Our vote was 4-5. It could be different on a different night by who was here or not here in that presentation. It was a very passionate discussion, and I would just encourage you to continue talking, coming to the meetings, and presenting your perspective. I'd also suggest for everyone too, and I just noticed it a couple days ago, that there was a fairly large article that I caught walking during my lunch break, in the front page of the Napa Register, talking about the history and of our ag preserve and Measure P and Measure J and the importance of that, and that really speaks to what this whole community, including the cities, are doing to preserve agriculture in the ag preserve and not in essence speaks to maybe a question of what are the responsibilities of towns to take up the needs for housing and things like that. So I think it's like I said, Liz made a very passionate argument, and our vote was what it was, but please consider or continue and providing your perspective. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, and I appreciate the explanation. I think, as I contemplated really balancing the situation, because everybody has a valid perspective, and it really comes down to what you perceive the value of the town ultimately is. And I did a little research on some of these the California policies, and it really seemed to stem from growth. Right? It was a blanket policy across every town and every county in the state, predicated on the perpetual nature of growth that people assume will always exist. And my takeaway from that was that these policies tend to be put in place categorically, but there's always a case-by-case element. And I would just ask us not to, I think, concede to these sort of categorical, well-intentioned but somewhat blind directions where the state says, well, we will penalize towns if they don't do X. It's not even an incentive, it's punishment, which is a very heavy-handed approach. But what California is it's a diverse place. Not every town is a clone of the other, and these towns are stacked up pretty close to each other. So I think to succumb to some of these guidelines, to not question them or not to stand up to what a policy that a lot of people don't believe in, I think isn't representative of what it means to live in this state, and not representative of what Yountville was really has become. And I think it's an important sort of moment to define the character of the town. The town limits are where they are. When those are hit, then what? Does the state say, we are now forcing towns to expand their boundaries by 20% in order to have more housing? And that could come next, right? So it always seems really incremental, but these are the big decisions that really chart the course of the future. And the future right now has been very favorable to us, and let's not compromise that.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Luciana Duarte, 1953, Yountville Crossroad, and I just had one thing to add to my husband's points, which is that, our neighbors, when we described to them the recent meeting where my husband attended and made his perspective clear, they were all incredibly appreciative that the town action group had voted the way you had voted. And if they had any idea that this would have come up again tonight, I guarantee you they would have been sitting here with us. We didn't know that this would be brought up again. We attended the meeting just in case it did. And we're very glad that we did, because now we understand a little bit better how the process works. But there are a lot of other people out there who are also very feel very close to the North Agricultural Parcel, and I think feel very strongly about preserving it. And it is particularly concerning to me to see the language here on page 14 where it says that the new policy was added in response to public feedback at the land use workshop. We were at the land use workshop, and the overwhelming feedback was also not accurate. It was that the overwhelming feedback was actually in terms of preserving the north parcel. So if you'd like to look at the tapes from that, you'll see it. Several of the tables reporting back actually reported that they would much prefer to preserve the parcel as it currently is. So I would want to make sure that however this is being pushed forward, that it's being done in a way that's accurate with what our neighbors actually feel.
Thank you. I mean, you said we want to speak. It's not really, this question isn't really before us tonight. It's more a reporting for reporting to how, but
Chair Knight, I just need to clarify a couple things, because I certainly appreciate your passion, but I think it's inappropriate to mischaracterize that this item was brought back up for reconsideration by this body, because that's not what's happening. The team is reporting the next steps, and if you will, the vote will go and reflect the discussion, and as part of the mission, we have an obligation. When there's general consensus, that's one thing. When an item is 4-5, consistently through, they need to share with the council what the votes were. And what the staff is telling you is that this particular process also has a role to go before the Zoning and Design Review Board. We have some programs that go before our Park and Recreation Advisory Board. So what they're doing is actually being very transparent to you. There's no change in the vote. the tag vote is 4-5 on this particular policy. And ultimately, the council will take the feedback from the advisory group. And I have bad news for you all. As hard as you've all worked and everything, I just have a hard time believing that our council isn't going to make some minor adjustments here and there. Just be a little bit surprised if they didn't. But that doesn't mean they're not taking the input. Just like it's their responsibility in the areas that do have impact on the Zoning Design Review Board. And while I appreciate your commentary about telling the state to go do something, I have to, in my role, be very clear that that is something I have to advise, that there are consequences and there are state laws that we're required to do. And I'll be the first to say that we work very strenuously to try to maintain local control. One of the challenges that we face in California is that many communities, not necessarily dissimilar to ourselves, have all worked on policies that in the end have not been helpful to creating housing. So we're now facing an environment where we continue to see an erosion in local control on certain types of housing programs because we have not, and here I'm talking about all collective 400 plus cities in California, work to resolve that. But we don't have the ability to just say no. And in fact, we've just learned, I don't know, I'm going to say it wrong, Sandra, but we just learned that we're now subject because we're part of, let's see, only 13 or 14 cities in the state were found by the Housing and Community Development Department to be in full compliance. And as a result, when it comes to affordable housing, we're actually going to be subject to streamlining process requirements because the state's viewing that Yountville is not doing enough. Now, I will say they only found 13 cities to be in compliance. Maybe you can clarify.
I think it's worth noting that we're in a group of 148 cities, and that means that we're meeting our above moderate requirement for housing, and we're also reporting annually to HCD. There is a group of 387 cities that has failed to meet any of the housing obligations. So while we're not in the elite group of 13, we're in the next smaller group and well ahead of the far majority of California cities.
I wanted to address the comment. I did. I have a copy of the worksheets from the workshop, and just like we had a 4-5 vote here, or a 5-4, however you look at it, the the results from the workshop represented a split in a very similar way. It was not overwhelming one way or the other. I'm happy to show them to you after the meeting.
I have an additional comment on this. In reading it and then reading forward, I find a contradiction between policy LU 10.3 and LU 6-2A. Okay? 10.3 says discourage the redesignation of agricultural land within the town limits, except where it can be found that the project will A, B, C, D, okay, and gives some very specific requirements for what you need to consider before you can redesignate agricultural land, okay. I think having a policy that says consider rezoning the whole thing or even a portion contradicts that.
Again, the vote is what it was, and we're going to be sharing that exact same vote.
I see two policies that appear to contradict each other. How do we wind up with one policy here?
Right, and that's going to be shared with the ZDRB and with council.
Yeah.
And even though it says right there, programs for ZDRB and council review, and you see 2 on there, they're looking at all of them. These are 2 highlighted ones just because we knew about the discussions that it was last month, that we knew that there would be some interest. But it's important to note the town council isn't just looking at 2 policies in the land use element. They're looking at everything you've done over the last 6 months, and you shouldn't be discouraged to think that the past 6 months have been thrown away and only 2 are being talked about. No, they're looking at everything. This is just two simple things that we wanted to highlight, saying these are going to be discussed among all the others.
And I think we need to move on, but I think at some point that policy actually said rezone, and we actually changed it to consider.
Consider.
So consider is, we already had the conversation about consider.
Yeah.
Consider is open to a lot of interpretation, and I think when you considering this policy in relation to the other policy, I think there's consistency.
They work together.
So
They do work together.
Wording policy 6-2A then to say, consider rezoning a portion along the lines of or in consideration for the requirements outlined in policy LU 10.3.
And that is exactly the intent, because any decision would have to be found in conformance with all of the general plan policies.
I mean, the document can't be inconsistent anywhere,
Right.
or it's not valid. So I'm sure before we get to the end of this process, all that will be considered very specifically by staff and considered by council. So
I think that one thing that I've become aware of is in some of the community meetings and our discussion here, or mainly the community, it's not real clear that we're not saying we're going to do these things. It's if the property changes hands, if there's changes in it, the town wants to be able to have some control over it. And I'm not sure how much the public understands that maybe there needs to be some other word or statements to say this is not the direction we're going immediately, but it is setting something in place to, if changes in that take place, the town has some control.
Very good point.
Yes, and I think
Thank you.
and that's exactly what we had talked about, and specifically why we wanted to say, this one to say consider rezoning versus like the North Washington residential properties where I think it says, rezone because there's some things that we would want to do right away, and some things like this one, which is really just, it's putting it into the future, and probably, when the next housing element revision, we'll be talking about the housing element in a little bit, but when that comes, we may be looking for additional land to accommodate more housing, so this would kind of put maybe this parcel in play sometime in the future, and that's really what we were talking about anyway.
Thank you. I have just a general just process here now in terms of timing. So we're at 20 minutes to 8. And could you just give us a quick, are we close to finishing up with land use policies, and are you considering the fact that we would basically maybe stay longer tonight till 9, and if that's what you're proposing, I want to check with the committee to see if they're open to do that.
Okay, well, first of all, we would love to get through all of the 3 chapters that we have on the agenda today. If we don't, we probably have time to work on it, like housing, at the next meeting. But again, we'd like to kind of move through it. This is the end of the land use section as far as staff is concerned. If there was anything that the TAG members wanted to discuss, we could discuss that. I think we've probably been through everything at this point. The circulation we have just a couple of things that we pulled for discussion. Our feeling is that the circulation that whole element was revised in 2015, only 3 years ago, and as opposed to just kind of making sure the references were correct and taking some of the specificity out. Is that a word? Out of some of the policies and make them a little bit more general. But I don't think there's a lot to talk about. We'll see when we do to do circulation. And then for housing, I have a presentation just generally about the housing element, the RENA process, how the town is doing in meeting its RENA, and kind of some of the changes about housing element law, because I think that really sets the stage of what we're doing with with the housing element, which is essentially not change. I mean, staff's recommendation isn't to change anything about it, and it's because it's going to have to be revised again in a few years.
So the housing element presentation is informational?
It's informational.
And how long do you think that would be about?
Probably 10 minutes.
Okay. Is the advisory group open to at least right now planning to be here till 8:30? Is that okay with everyone?
That'd be the limit.
And then we can consider a time. Okay, good. So thank you.
Okay. All right, so then shall we move on to circulation?
I just have one question, sorry. In the document, there are places where we use the term rural and the term small town atmosphere, and some places we struck rural, but in a lot of other places, rural was kept in. I think it is more appropriate and agree with striking rural, because I don't think we're a rural town anymore, but the small town atmosphere seems to encompass sort of what rural might have embodied when we were doing language. So it's just cleanup, but I think it'll make it more consistent and easy to understand.
Okay.
I noticed that too. Thank you for that comment. I think, is there consensus that it makes more sense for it to be a small town and to be consistent through the document? Good. All right.
Okay.
Are there any other questions about, I just had one, maybe two, but are there any other comments from the group about land use? Or no, if they're not, I just had one in terms of policy, LU 6.1, which is on page 13, scale of development. In part of the other iterations in these matrices, we talked about the 50% rule. And so just refresh my mind in terms of our decision with this policy, how the 50% rule how that fits into our description or our policies of the scale of development.
Rule is still part of the zoning and design ordinance. This goes on to explain the type of scale and building massing that is desirable, especially if you're considering two-story development, and that it's not to be exaggerated or bulky or overwhelm the neighborhood. So these words are intended to further that rule.
So I guess just for everyone remembers that, this wasn't an either or, eliminate the 50-50 rule or
Correct.
This. It was basically, I thought there was general consensus that we were supportive of the 50-50 rule, but we like this language. Does everyone agree with that? Okay, good. Let's see. I had a note here. Let me just double check to see if I thought in this document, I can't see right now that I thought, was there any new policies? I think there was the pop-up. Was there any other new policies that you added to this matrix that was different from the one before?
No. That was the only one.
Okay. Okay, good. I don't have any other questions. Or any other questions from the committee? Just to try to be consistent, is there any other comments and opening up the public comments? Any other comments from the audience on the discussion we've had on land use policies? So I'll open up the public comment period now. If no one has any other comments, I'll close the public comment periods, and we'll move on to the discussion of the circulation policy. Thank you.
Okay, so the first one that we wanted to flag was a new program that appears on page 4. It doesn't have an identification. And this is about one-way streets. Let's see. It's at the end, at the bottom of page 4, the new program there. And this is about one-way streets, and so the policy came up because staff was talking about how some of the streets are kind of narrow, and that making them one way might enhance the parking and be able to accommodate more parking on the streets, and that could alleviate parking issues in the town elsewhere. And but kind of after talking about this a little bit more, it's on this at by staff. We actually are recommending deleting this program. There have been some kind of, in Napa, in the town of Napa, they're actually taking out a lot of their one-way streets now. So unless there's a burning desire for one-way streets in town, I think we would recommend deleting it.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
I think the only one time I've heard in 20 years a conversation about one-way streets possibly came up in a conversation with Creek Street, and that was not a popular suggestion. So I if there is consensus, I would support removing this policy from the document. Is that agreed by everyone?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
That one was easy.
Yes, thank you. That's great.
Okay. The next one is a policy that actually is already existing in the general plan, in the circulation element, and I believe this one was added in the 2015 revision, but I'm not sure. But this one is on page 5. It's at the bottom of your page 5. And it says, change the classification of Yount Street to be a residential street, and then continue to prohibit trucks on Yount Street with the exception of agricultural vehicles. Staff is also recommending deleting this policy, and there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the classification of the street as a residential or a local street is something that's actually determined by the federal. There's a classification system from the Federal Highway Administration, and Yount Street is a collector street, so we don't really have the option of changing the classification, and you have to follow with the classification in order to be eligible for federal funding. The other issue that we have with this is continuing to prohibit trucks on Yount Street. Well, there are already businesses on Yount Street that need deliveries. Hurley's, Bardesano, Maison Fleury. So this just isn't a practical statement anyway. So staff is recommending that we just delete this policy.
Any other comments from the committee? I support that. And I think the biggest issue, like on Yount, is really more about design features and many years ago, basically on Yount Street was basically either if there was even a dotted line on Yount, then that was how traffic was. The lanes were separated. And sometimes in the past, we've had very energetic engineers that all of a sudden said we had to have glued reflective dots and double lines on residential streets, and that's my biggest concern, is that when we design our streets that we keep them as a small town, and that's what I would hope, that in terms of circulation, that if we have to have double lines for no passing on Washington, that's fine, but to find them on other streets in the community, I think it's just almost encouraging faster speeds and things like that, because it looks like you're driving on a boulevard and when it's really a residential street. And from my experience, the more you read about trying to make things smaller and less commercial or boulevard-like, then the people do drive more careful. And that's, I would hope, in terms of our circulation, that the policies move in that direction than saying whether it's commercial or not. Or
Agreed. I have just a thought on as far as the school goes. If we ever put in those, I'm not sure what they're called, but the activated by pedestrians where the light comes out of the ground, that's the absolute perfect place for it, especially if we're going to delete this policy for very good reasons. I have no problem with that. But it just seems as if that's one of the places where it seems so profound to me that we don't have that there. I mean, it's children, lots of interaction right in this really small corridor. So it's just a thought. It's not really.
I think there's actually another policy line that I thought we will eventually get to that talks at 6.9.1. It talks about additional measures, additional lighting, enhanced signage. I don't think anyone's we're talking about stop signs and all that, but the technology out there I'm very concerned on Washington Street near Bouchon and all that, where when
That's
you're
another
driving
place.
that at night and the cars are coming with LED lights, it's almost impossible to see one on those paths, and we may need more sophisticated ways for people to alert traffic, even on that street, that they're crossing it. And so that's where I saw 6.9.1 being an opportunity for that in the future.
Just a little history and background for you. The reason we don't have any of the activated and light this and that is it's actually prohibited by another general plan element that says we're not supposed to have those.
Are we?
So, I mean, we don't have lighted, the activation things, that's all because when you go back to an earlier definition of interpretation of the general plan, like those lighted things and flashing caution signs were not authorized. So, I mean,
Well, it's not
just
prohibited, but it was eliminated as an option during the last circulation update.
And is 6.9.1 providing an opportunity for that again for you to
Potentially,
consider?
yes.
It's reintroducing the discussion.
Okay, good. All right, so we'll move through. Thank you.
So back on 5.2, are we kind of, is there a
That's fine.
consensus then
Please,
that?
please go.
Dropping it.
We're dropping it, right, okay.
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 The next one that we wanted to talk about was policy 10.2. And this is on page 13. Actually, we don't really have a lot to talk about this, but we wanted to just, we made a little change to this, which is what's indicated here and on the slide in underline. So we just wanted to bring that forward, and because we wanted to be sure that we were addressing driverless cars essentially and other new technology that might come forward. So
Exactly. Historically, when the town has looked at its parking ratios and zoning ordinance, according to this policy, we look at what's the trends in vehicle size and the use. Looking forward for the next several years, which is what this general plan is doing, it would be ignorant to not consider emerging technology. So that's the only reason why that's there.
Great.
okay,
Good.
I think we're good on that. And then the last one that we wanted to talk about was the, so this is a climate action plan program, and you'll see at the end of the matrix there are a lot of climate action plan programs that are listed. And what we intend to do is when we make the final programs, we're going to see what we can bring forward into the general plan. Some of these are kind of already addressed in some of the previous policies, but that's where it says integrate. But the one that we wanted to really just kind of get a little bit more, some feedback, was this idea of considering establishing a pedestrian-only zone on Washington Street if adequate off-site parking facilities and connecting transit service are available. This is kind of a challenging thing to try to implement now. With new technologies, it may become more possible in the future, and which could be a reason to keep it in. If we could bring it forward and have it kind of be a standalone policy or program in the general plan. It is in the climate action plan. We do have programs in the general plan that say, in the conservation element, that say, implement the climate action plan, so it's not going to be forgotten if it's not brought forward in the general plan. But this was kind of the only one that we thought might warrant some discussion by the TAC.
I think it's a great idea. I've seen this work very well in other towns where they have turned whole streets into pedestrian malls, okay? But I do wonder, how did they solve the problems of getting delivery trucks and et cetera into all the businesses?
Right, and sometimes they have hours, like in the morning, or certain hours when you can make deliveries.
And then when you consider all the hotels we have on Washington, that means we got to have a way for the guests to get to and from their cars one way or another, somewhere.
Right, and a pedestrian-only zone, it could be limited also to, one weekend a month or certain days. So,
what area are you is being
And
discussed.
it's not really, I mean, it's not identified in the policy, and I don't even know at the climate action plan, at the climate action group, if we had the climate action team, if we had identified exactly a
I think in
specific
general,
area.
it's a great concept. It's just
Right.
making it work might be really difficult.
Yes.
I think
granted.
there has to be some other considerations within that discussion. In the mornings, we get a lot of traffic through town from farm workers, from construction people, from everybody else who frequent a lot of the retail establishments in town for services as they're leaving town, as they're coming into town for breakfast, for coffee, for lunches, and all that kind of thing. If we start limiting a lot of that, those people who shop in town, because it's in town on their way through, are going to go elsewhere. So we're kind of, we have to look at both aspects to it. I know for myself, I'm not going to want to park 2 blocks away to walk over to get a cup of coffee. Because if the parking lot's full and I have to park somewhere else. So I'm just saying we have to consider a lot of those other aspects to this, as Carl said. How do, all these different things work, and will they actually work? There are many different elements we have to look at.
And I'm going to offer a few of those considerations for you because as noble and interesting as it is, I think we have to look at, Yountville has a unique circulation. We've made a conscious decision to develop our commercial core along Washington and protect the integrity of the neighborhoods. This is actually going to shift everything into the neighborhoods. More importantly, and I also think we have to be realistic on public safety access. We're talking about, we only have 2 north-south routes that connect. We only have 1 leg of Washington on the south without, I think maybe we need to come up with something that's not as specific on this, more like creative ideas as technology emerge. But right now, I mean, I can guarantee you public safety would come out against this because you're not going to give them an access route. Our gas station is on the north. I'm just saying we have a lot of practicality. We don't have parallel opportunities to move traffic. And you bring up somebody mentioned, well, what do we do with all the hotels? Well, who's going to schlep there? Where is the parking going to be? Because I don't think we need to be naive. Adequate parking right now, it's not there. And that's why I'm saying, to me, this, if anything, I think we need to phrase it more like we've done with some of the other things. As appropriate, evaluate creative things. But this one, I mean, what's going to happen is people are going to get drawn to this, and it's going to detract, I think, from a lot of the other positive things in the document, because people are going to be focused on what? And I just think that's, I don't know why you would want to do that when you've got so much good stuff in there, but we just don't have a lot of capacity to, because when you do that, you're moving, let me be real clear, you're moving everything onto Yount Street, which you just discussed about wanting to retain and not have, a collector, and talking about the residential. That's just it. We don't have any place else to go.
Agreed.
I would think that we would not want to consider establishing something like this, especially on a quote-unquote a permanent basis. I mean, the town already, we have the ability, when we have a special event, for example, we block off the traffic on Washington Street when we have the wine and the vendors and everything out for events like that. So we're already able to accomplish that on a special event basis.
I think that Joel and Steve make a really valid point about carrying capacity. I think we're reaching limitations that, unfortunately, great ideas like this pedestrian zone, I mean, I'm thinking Salamanca and other places I've been where it's fabulous, but at the same time, you know, this town just has limitations, and this is one of them. Because, I mean, even a bicycle event, which I have, aren't they terrible because I'm one of them?
I'm just so scared I'm going to hit one of you.
Well, please don't. So just that alone causes, you know, consternation from a lot of folks. So I guess what I'm saying is there are limitations to great ideas, and unfortunately in the heart of Napa Valley, we might be reaching that when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, agreed.
Is there a motion
Or consensus.
to consider removing this policy? Does someone have a motion? Or I heard a comment in support of it. So,
I think it's a great idea. I don't see how we're going to make it work.
so I sense that there's consensus that it's a nice idea, but there's only so much we can propose and consider. At this point, that we should consider removing this policy from the document. Is that the consensus of the group?
It's not our place to get into the weeds of the details. It's our place to envision the future. We all recognize that there's going to be roadblocks to such an idea, but if we all agree it's a good idea, let the council figure out what works.
Or is it not a great idea because of the idea that it will push traffic into the neighborhoods? I think that is the biggest consideration against it, is maybe with emerging technology there won't be as much traffic, but then do you even need a pedestrian-only zone because there won't be as much traffic? I mean, it just, I don't know.
I guess, in my perspective, I don't think it's a good idea because really, historically, Yountville's a linear community. Washington Street was 29. I mean, it was the way and so we're linear and we're narrow, and I don't see how you put a plug right in the middle of your linear community and not just create a massive anthill of a mess. So
we even really need it. I mean, are the pedestrians able to navigate Washington Street? I mean, it gets a little crowded in front of Bouchon, but
to me, it comes down to we're an agricultural community. In 20 years, that's not going to change. We're still going to have agricultural vehicles. We're going to still have people that work in the vineyards. We're going to still have people that work in the shops. We're going to still have housing, construction, and so. As technology changes, yes, it's going to change, but it's going to change maybe how the tourists get here. But it's not going to necessarily change how the local community works. So again, weighing all these different things, I would propose that we drop this.
It's also not going to change the public safety concerns. That's not going away either, regardless of what technology we have.
Right. Boyd, do you support this statement that you want to consider taking a vote on it, or
not if I'm the only one.
Okay. I'm sensing you might be the only one. Is there consensus from the group, considering a little concern by one member that this policy be removed?
Yes.
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 Okay. Let's move forward. Thank you.
Okay, so that is the end of the circulation programs and policies that we've flagged. So I think we'd like to just kind of open it up to the tag, and we can go page by page, or probably be.
Can we stick with right where we were? I just have a question on cap 2-4H. The evaluate replacing the Yountville trolley with an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a way to say evaluate replacing the Yountville trolley with emerging technology that is more consistent with sustainability, something like that, and not worry about the nits and grits of what will it look like.
It says with an electric vehicle, so you mean as of not saying an electric vehicle,
right? But just to, I mean.
Is that in process?
I thought it was. That's what I thought too. Yeah.
Is it? I'm sorry, I didn't.
They're already actively researching it. Yeah, but no purchase has been made.
I see.
That's not true. I have information to advise you that we have been advised by Napa Valley Transportation Authority that they have and are purchasing electronic buses that will be working to serve. That's just happened in the last couple of weeks, but that's confirmed, and they're moving forward with replacing the 3 shuttle services in the Yountville, St. Helena, and Calistoga with electric. So we'll learn more about what that, but the details and service reliability hopefully will be improved with that particular. But that's something our council has supported in a lot from the feedback they've heard and everything from that. So I think that should be, I don't know if the Public Works Director can comment more, but I mean, it's...
No, I think that's it.
Then we don't need it as policy if it's already in place. It's already done.
Right, I think we would not
Eliminate it.
include that one.
One additional comment I want to make on the circulation is I just,
existing. Right.
I think
Right.
one of the issues that we have that may have been addressed in somewhere within the policy is just the difficulty that we have moving people through town in the busy times of town along with the traffic. And part of what I think you were talking about, the goal of the closing of the street, which turned out to be not a very good idea, was to just be able to have a freedom of movement for people, having that happen. I think just we need to, as we look toward the future and what might happen with technology and so on, I think there could be real improvement on, for example, smart stop signs. There's experimentation with smart stop signs now, and there could be more where you could have all 4 stop signs like sort of activate to close it open for pedestrians to cross all at the same time. A lot of times now you have people coming up and they're sort of dazed and walking across the street, and you're wanting to turn and then they turn, walk the other way, so someone's blocked for quite a while from going anywhere on weekends. The street that comes off the freeway and turns onto Washington Street, that stop sign is perfect for spacing cars so that it becomes impossible to get out of Rancho de Napa. It works really well when it's really busy to just have a stop and a pacing, maybe some sort of future development of smart stop signs without having lights and everything could help to monitor that somewhat. That would add to bigger gaps in between so that those things could be possible. So those are things I think in the circulation area, those are kinds of thoughts in the circulation area that I assume there's room for, but don't know whether it got addressed.
And I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I think we could go back and look through them and see if there is an existing policy or program where we can kind of work that idea into. I think that's a great idea.
I think when you talk about that one statement about illumination, which I always thought was for sidewalks or paths, it doesn't prohibit in the future some type of speed regulation that's not a timed stop sign or something like that, I guess. I thought the language was flexible enough to allow for illumination, consideration of other illuminated traffic calming measures.
We're paying attention to that, and we're looking for that, and we're trying to come up with or encouraging smart solutions to those kinds of issues.
Not that anyone here supports stop signs, electric stop signs in town, but with the advancement of technology, maybe there are opportunities in the future. So, thank you.
To clarify, what were we striking out for the NVTA electric vehicle? Was that 24H or what was that? The previous one?
It's the CAP 2-4H. So it's a policy that's in the climate action plan. So now the town can go and mark that done. But we just won't specifically include it in the general plan.
I had a question about 6.2.1 where it says, but discuss whether in full support moving forward. This has to do with a sidewalk master plan. And so, do you have any comment? Or I see this in connection too also with 6.9.3, which now that I talked earlier in the meeting, it does say review the pedestrian route between the Veterans Home entry and downtown Yountville to determine such sidewalk, higher visibility crosswalks. I mean, just a consideration of improvement of that pathway. And I think 6.9.3 answers my question that I had earlier, that I think it creates, excuse me?
That's between the property.
Between
Between the property and the park, rather than on the property.
Are we talking, now you're talking about 6.2.1.
No, I was thinking 6.9.3. That doesn't address on the property, as you'd mentioned, you had an interest in
Path on the
earlier.
property is the path that connects that property to downtown Yountville.
Okay.
The entry.
So it goes to the entry of the
Okay.
Veterans Home property, not on the property.
Okay. Well, I would propose that, well, there's a couple things I propose with 6.9.3. I would propose removing this underlined state-operated description, which really bothers me. I mean, we all understand there's a relationship difference, but let's not put emphasize it in a way that seems it separates the communities. And I think this policy works by just saying review the pedestrian route between the Veterans Home and downtown Yountville. And while we all understand there's issues with the Veterans Home and the differences, I don't see why we should not be actively trying to improve how people move from the Veterans Home to our community, because they are a neighborhood of this community. And so I don't, this language seems to separate us instead of bring us together. So we can go back to 6.2. That was my initial question, but maybe is there support for 6.9.3 to that I would suggest remove state operated and remove entry, and staff can comment on it, but in terms of trying to improve the movement of veterans from the Veterans Home to downtown?
I think I want to clarify a couple things, because I don't know that I have any concern about you removing the state operated, but I do want to clarify the issue a little bit. When you were hearing from some of the residents, the part that they were really talking about is under the jurisdiction and the property of the state, and that is the part that the town does not have jurisdiction to come in, design, build, or operate. And I would say that for those of you that are familiar with that area, the town has actually done a whole lot of work from the Solano, California Drive, across the railway, all the way in. We've actually done what I would argue. We've actually also included the Yountville bike path, which allows for accessibility without going into town, and the connection. The issue that particular, and I can say this with some degree of certainty because I've had conversations with that particular person, they're frustrated with the circulation path and the condition of the sidewalks on the Veterans Home property. And that's just not our jurisdiction. So if there's a way to come up with a compromise language, and I was also listening to some of your comments, and it may be something where we can come up with and I'm changing gears, so I apologize, my staff knows I do this. Listening, maybe you want kind of a general thing that talks about a willingness to evaluate and incorporate emerging changes in technology and whatever in our traffic control and circulation design. And I'm saying it that way because that's very vague, but I think it could be something that would say, as something comes up and we know a bit more about it, because we've had some discussions at a staff level about trying to encourage an autonomous shuttle just because it may be able to augment the existing. So I don't want you to feel that we're not receptive to some of those things, but that there were some things that were put in. And we don't, like some communities, I had a resident ask me, she had moved from an urban area, and she goes, there aren't any things on the crosswalks. I'm used to I press the button and it beeps and it tells me. And I go, we don't have any stoplights.
Yeah.
They are associated with stoplights. So I'm just saying it's a little bit, but I think from a staff perspective, the idea of coming up with something that embraces and recognizes changing technologies and things that could be used would be appropriate. And to the same way, if we need another element, because what I would also say, if there is a significant redevelopment implementation of the master plan, we may want to partner with the Veterans Home on the ultimate circulation, because they may need a secondary access road down to Solano, for example, instead of funneling everything out California. So do those make sense to staff from that standpoint? All right.
But just as we had those other veterans policies, to work with on, that might be what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
so.
I'm also, and I appreciate, Steve, your comments. I just want to recognize the fact that what I'm proposing in terms of removing state-operated, because it's understood that it is, and the entry, is that we do have even though we don't have control over the property, we do have a relationship with the Vets Home where we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on improving a swimming pool and other activities. And the only suggestion for me in this statement is that we recognize the fact that at some point, the mayor spoke at the Little Hoover Commission meeting about supporting development of staff housing on the property. So we're talking with him about that we recognize the fact that we have residents that probably walk more between the Veterans Home and the town of Yountville than use the swimming pool. That we recognize the importance of as soon as possible improving a path that's insufficient along the north side of that property. And so
I walk that path
It
quite
goes both
frequently.
ways.
Yeah.
It goes both ways. Town residents, we both have dogs, and people are walking to the Veterans Home.
Oh, yeah, it's a beautiful facility, and to improve the fact that residents could have a path there that was...
And there are many places along that path where it's super rickety for the veterans that are using the motorized scooters and everything. So it would be great, even though we don't have jurisdiction over it, if we could have language in a policy that would kind of mirror some of the other ones where maybe we can consider partnering with them to improve passageway.
Before Joe's... Well, go ahead, Joe.
So I just want to chime in a little bit about that path and the real challenges with that path. So it was constructed in a time when ADA access wasn't nearly as regulated as it is now. So I would conservatively estimate that at about a $3 million job. It might exceed that, because you could not have that path in the same route in the same way as it is now. It would have to have a winding route with about a 2% grade with stops along the way. It would be extremely expensive to do that. We wouldn't be able to do any other funding than general fund, which would be a really tough pill to swallow, given that we don't own the property. We would be assuming some risk if we're constructing it, and then not having the ability to maintain it or have much say in how it goes. It would create a lot of problems. So I do appreciate that people use that path and that we want to help the vets and the people who use it get back and forth more safely. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I just want people to recognize that.
I appreciate that, Joe. And I'm not. I think Ed Warren, who was just the past Allied Chair Council, Council Chair, was recommending a different location because of the understanding that that's a difficult place to design it. So I'm not proposing a place. I'm not. I'm just saying in our circulation element, I think we should recognize the fact that we support improving a pathway there, and I'm not daunted by dollars like that, because they're a significant portion of our community. So Steve, if you have other comments, I'm just proposing language here.
I have an idea for you.
Okay.
Listening to everything, I think what it could be is we use some language that would be encourage and work with the Veterans Home to improve on-site circulation and connection to the town, and to ensure that any potential master plan development it works on improving interconnection access. I mean, something like that. But I think I hear the spirit that you're coming from, Chair Knight, and I think if we use that kind of language, we can certainly work with that. And then that would allow us to influence, if they were to start improving some of the development, then we can say, hey, we need to be working on the connection. So I think if that works for you, that might be an idea that bridges that, but it doesn't necessarily put us in the idea that we're the implementer, and maybe at some point we could do something. But I will share with you, as Chair Knight pointed out, the town's the one that put all of the sidewalks in right around the pool that we operate, and you'll find it interesting that no sidewalks that come to the pool. But that's certainly one of the reasons we also have a whole lot of emphasis on the Yountville shuttle and trolley in terms of being able to connect from a mobility standpoint to move people up there. But that, I was thinking, just listening, that might kind of bridge that kind of a dialogue for you.
Thank you. Is the group supportive of maybe, instead of us wordsmithing here, to take Steve's consideration and ask staff to maybe come back with revised language for 6.9.3 at the next meeting?
Yes.
Good.
And also the comment he made about embracing new technology with regarding to intersections and so on.
Right.
Good. Good. Thank you.
I'm looking at it and I'm thinking it's an additional policy, not changing the language of 6.9.3, since that's really talking about getting to the entry.
It'd be modifying the language and adding an additional one.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
W.
Yeah, I want to support Steve's initial comment, or not initial, one of his comments, regarding technology. When I think about technology in this group, I feel like we're always trying to catch up. It's like with this, if you get an upgrade, I mean, I'm just devastated. It probably won't work or something will go wrong, but it's technology moving forward. And the example I'd like to use is we've talked a lot about autonomous cars, okay? Now, they seem pretty cool to me. They seem like they would be a big hit with the people that might frequent this town from out of town, and I don't know what type of discussion leads anywhere here because we don't know what that means. But to amplify and build on what Steve's saying, where are these cars going to go? What if I want to go on my autonomous car from Napa, where I'm staying, to Bouchon because I've heard it's really cool and I can get dropped off right at the end of the line? Where does that car go? We already have a parking problem here. And so I think that it's beneficial that we actually say as a committee that if we're going to envision technology in the future and use something like an autonomous car, we have to build into the thinking down the road not only what that means in terms of circulation, but where do they go? What will they do? And I think that, unless I'm wrong, it would serve our council, our future councils, better if right now we recognize that we don't know exactly what that potential means, but we know we have to create, some kind of fortress around that idea. Otherwise, we're going to get there, and then we're going to try to deal with an issue that we're already behind, similar to the upgrade. So,
is that 10.5.1? That was one I had a question on, and I wonder if that's related to.
Someone explain to me what ROW is on that too. Right of way. Okay, never mind. It's late last night.
I think it talks specifically to the point I made, but I was only trying to use my point as a hypothetical to suggest that, as part of an envisioning group, it seems important to me that we don't have the answer, but we may have the question facing us. And so if we consider suggesting to the future councils and maybe this one that there's a direction that we feel is important so that we're trying to stay as proactively ahead in a general way that Steve suggested, because autonomous cars is just one example. There's bound to be other things that are going to impact this community, but we know that it is that linear type of community that's not going to have the ability to expand outside its footprint, you might say. And so I guess I'm just trying to say I'd like to see that somehow through this committee come out, whether it's a policy or just, like Steve said, a broader net to cover the things that we know will come. We just don't know exactly what to do about them because they're not here yet. I don't know if that makes any sense, but...
Do you have a suggestion in terms of, do you think, would you like staff to maybe just to look through the circulation, if they're also looking at in terms of this issue of the vet's home, to consider language that would talk about technology in the future and how it affects circulation? Or
I do. I think Steve had a really good way of kind of encumbering a lot of things in a simple couple sentences. Can you do that again?
Maybe, Davi, what you could do is maybe you could speak to Nathan and you could have just discussion with him, and maybe you could come up with a policy consideration that we could bring
Just
back.
Does it make sense to you?
It does. Just as we're bringing back other policies to the tag at the next meeting regarding what we already talked about, we can. I think it's pretty easy for staff to come up with a policy that addresses emerging technology, but even autonomous vehicles in particular, and how they relate to parking and development of future driveway drop-off areas. We'll come up with something and share it with the tag at the next meeting.
Okay.
If everyone feels like that's
fine.
cool.
Yes.
And you did see in the news the other day that the Chinese are coming up with a autonomous drone, that they've designed one. So now we got to figure out where will George Jetson park his vehicle when he comes zooming into town 50 years from now. So so it's relevant. It's relevant. So
Yeah. I'm jetpacking home after this meeting, so that's how it works.
So
I have one other comment.
Yeah.
Okay. On objective 11 or 11.1, reducing traffic congestion resulting from on-street bus parking. I've never noticed a lot of buses on the streets, but I sure has noticed a lot of limo drivers parking all over the place while they're waiting for their guests to finish eating at Bouchon or the laundry or wherever. Maybe we need to reduce where they, or limit where the limo drivers can park also.
We do see a lot of them over where, the part of town where
If you're up at the north side, yeah.
Tons of not only buses, but limos also.
I don't see many buses, but I've seen lots of limos over
And,
there, yeah.
you know, the fact that someone's parked isn't such a big thing, but it's, if they sit idling, which they will oftentimes for, a half hour or an hour or whatever, that's not such a good thing. But now, and I don't know if they can't do this now, but they used to be able to park behind, where the tennis courts are.
Behind Bellagio.
Hotel, that's where I used to see a lot of the buses park, and I don't know if they still do, but I thought that was kind of a designated area.
They do park there. There's currently some trailers because they're remodeling Bellagio.
Okay.
But the parking spaces still exist there.
Okay.
But to address Carl's comment, objective 11.1 could say designate parking lot for tour buses and limousines.
Yeah.
I mean, please, that wouldn't.
As 11.2 does.
Yeah. 11.2 says limousines too. So.
And oversized, no, not just oversized limos, all limos.
Okay.
Do you have any discussion on getting back to my 6.2.1, this sidewalk master plan? Is it a conversation that you need some comment from us on?
Well, one of the reasons it wasn't brought up as a discussion was because during the land use elements that we've had, there was the one that said put sidewalks on the east side of Washington Street. So you got sidewalks on either side of Washington Street the whole time. And so designating a sidewalk master plan is really just the circulation way of implementing that land use one. So the two policies go hand in hand with each other.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from the committee or the group on the circulation?
I would
element?
agree with where it says, make it clear that the section in the Old Town Historic District not be subject to that policy. 6.2.1.
Section of Washington Street within the Old Town Historic District?
That was the staff recommendation.
Except at the last land use, as Nathan mentioned, there was support to do sidewalks on both sides,
Including Old Town.
from Vandeleur Park up to Jessup.
To Jessup, okay.
Feedback received.
Okay.
On Washington Street.
On Washington Street.
Washington Street only.
Okay,
Right.
okay. I just, in the 6.2.1, it specified from Yountville Community Park north of Madison Street. So. it
On
seems
Washington
like-
Street.
Okay,
So it becomes Lincoln when it kind of goes straight
Right,
there. That
right.
left turn is when it becomes Washington.
I think we might be able to make life a lot easier. I don't know that you need this policy because we've filled the gaps in, and there is, unless you want to revise it right now, with the exception of the Old Town Historic, sidewalk linkage has been completed from the south to the north. There's one section on the French Laundry that is asphalt, but as far as the connection, and then we've gone as far as we can before we hit into the prohibition. On the, and I think this is an older one that's worth sharing with you because staff has been working on it. We also filled the gap on the Yount Street side. The focus has been on West Washington in the Old Town area, East Yount Street in the Old Town area, so that we now have connectivity. I'm just thinking that this is a carryover policy that really may not be necessary at this point because we now go have a sidewalk all the way down, and then Washington has sidewalks on both sides from basically Vandeleur Park, Weber, all the way down. Am I missing anything? So I don't know that what would we go master plan?
So, and in kind of conjunction with that, because there already is a land use policy that talks about introducing sidewalk on this side of Washington Street from Madison down here to make sure that's all connected, the TAG has already expressed interest in putting sidewalk on that side of Washington Street. So with the TAG already supporting that decision, particularly when we had the discussion of the rezoning of these northern parcels, then yeah, this policy may not be necessary because the land use policy already covers it.
Let's drop.
So it's the TAG's call.
Is there other comment, consensus on what the group suggests that we do? Remove the policy?
Seems redundant.
so maybe we don't need it.
Let's remove it.
Do I hear a consensus
Remove
from everyone to
redundancy.
do that? Okay, so group, what I hear is that we suggest removing that policy.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other, have you covered all the issues you have in the circulation element?
Yes. Yes, we did.
Are there any other questions or that the group has for the circulation?
I have maybe, I'm sorry, I
It's
do
all right.
have one. On 5.4, I'm just maybe wondering if staff could just comment a little
I'm
bit
sorry,
on
which
that
one?
one?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, 5.4.
That is to retain the right-of-way between those two subdivisions, even though earlier policies in the circulation element had sought to make a connection there. And that's consistent with the connection that or the policy that we have in the safety element, where we acknowledge that change or that shift. And that would be to allow emergency access through that area rather than a dedicated street segment.
Yeah.
So we don't want to change the way it is.
Okay.
No, it's what
We
it,
want to reword it as presented.
Okay.
Okay.
But in
to be
effect,
consistent with what the tag already
Yes.
decided
Yes.
in the safety
that we're not
discussion.
changing it and having a
Right,
connection.
right,
Okay,
right.
To
that was
clarify,
what
it
I
is-
wanted to
No change in the
understand.
agreement.
I just wasn't sure
Right.
if I
Yeah.
understood.
For emergency
about-
access.
Do that.
Just clarifies that it's
Down
for
here.
emergency access only, okay.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
if you look at the second column, staff
Oh,
input what program 3.7 of the safety element says, and so you can see how it
Okay.
works together.
Are there other comments, or? I think hearing other discussion points, I'd like to open up the public comment if there's any comments from the public that are here on the circulation policies. Does anyone have? Pam?
Pam Reeves. I'm concerned about section 10.5.1. Number one, I don't know what the current public right-of-ways are, but we had an instance where there was a suggestion of putting a lot of parking around the North Park on the right-of-way, and I feel like the town has very little ability to acquire pieces of property around town, and that looking forward into the next 20 years, I feel like using potential pieces of town property for parking for visitors is not a wise use of that kind of resource. And I feel like it deserves some discussion in this committee about whether or not the town needs to look at other options for parking rather, and especially looking at the commercial pieces, because it's usually their burden as far as visitors go. So using the land that belongs to the residents to furnish visitor parking, I think, is an unfortunate use of that land.
Thank you. Any comments from the group? So this policy talks about throughout the town, provide more public parking throughout town by maximizing use of public right-of-way, where it can improve parking supply while maintaining the town design aesthetic.
I think our committee has discussed this quite a bit. I believe that we have discussed the availability of parking, the potential parking, and I think that's where this came in, is that we have discussed that.
Even going so far as including the ability to have parking structure. And I can't find it, but I know I think it's in the land use. It's in land use. So we encouraged alternative and innovative ways to provide additional parking in the commercial zones, including parking structures, innovative ways to stack, valet, et cetera. So I think we have addressed that the burden is on the commercial zone, and we are giving them permission to explore new ways, and it's very specific in the land use. So it was a very controversial discussion.
Yeah, that's true. But I also hear in terms of what Pam Reeves' suggestion is that we're not that we're encouraging town to consider as many other opportunities as possible before necessarily looking at public right of way. Does the committee feel there's enough
as we have before
conversation or language in what we've done that we're encouraging?
Right.
I
think so. Reference the land use policy.
I think one of the key words to focus on at the end of that policy is while maintaining the town design aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's giving the town opportunities to be creative and be innovative, but not at the risk of ruining the town's aesthetic.
Right.
And so that's why
Small town character.
There we go. It's what this policy does is it enables the staff to have that creativity and to find opportunities to make improvements while
Park
also
those autonomous cars
maintaining
in a
that
garage.
aesthetic.
I recall at one point in time, there was a proposal that was up for consideration by the council where they were looking to allow, I can't remember which of the new businesses it was, but to lease parking along the west side of Yountville Community Park.
Yes.
And so I think, I don't know, Pam, if that's specifically what you were alluding to, but that's kind of one of the concerns that I would have come to mind, and would just want to make sure that we're not exposing ourselves to something like that.
What this policy does is it's talking about providing public parking throughout town by maximizing public right-of-way. So that public parking is what this policy is talking about, while maintaining that town design aesthetic.
Okay.
I know I'm a broken record, but that town design aesthetic, it's underlined there because that's some new language modifying this policy, consistent with
Adding
what we believe
adding
the
the
tag has been
discussion
talking
that
about
it
the last few
that it
months.
maintains the town's design aesthetic instead of only putting maximizing parking as the only consideration, but also considering maintaining the town design aesthetic, because
we could maximize parking by putting elevators that go up 4 all across the right-of-way.
Right.
But that, from what we've heard, doesn't maintain the town's design aesthetic. And so this allows other methods.
does everyone feel that, I understand where Pam's coming from, but I'm glad to see this language is here in that one consideration, that one issue. I think that issue would have addressed concerns of how a business would have had parking and had people out there maintaining parking, and I mean, it has aesthetic around a park with basically having designated parking there where they had to watch and watch vehicles would have been disruptive to a park setting, and it would have affected the aesthetic of the park. So, so thank you. So is there any suggestions from the committee of language change to this item 10.5.1?
No.
I think, again, we'll let the staff take it.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. I'm going to close the public comment period. Is there any other comments from the committee, from the group? So it's 20:09. Is it possible that we could consider the informational presentation on housing policy at our next meeting?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Could you give us just an update on what we're looking at in the next meeting or two, what you're planning on doing, and so we can...
Sure. So the next meeting, we want to bring forward some policies and programs that we're anticipating putting in kind of a community and quality of life program element. And I don't know if there's anything, just a few new policies and programs. And so that's kind of a short, I think that will be pretty short. We'll talk about the housing, and
while also bringing back the circulation ones that we've been tasked to make edits and bring back, and potentially finish that vision statement.
And finish the vision statement, exactly.
So a 20-minute meeting.
Okay. So this isn't a meeting we're talking about potential other new elements to the doc. Is that what you're talking about?
Well,
presenting new elements?
we've talked about additional elements. Oh, and then the other thing is kind of an economic vitality / tourism kind of section or element in the plan. So those are other policies and programs that we're kind of writing at this point and want to bring forward. So we talked about having 3 additional elements. One, kind of on community and quality of life. And as we're going through that, some of them can be, and we've already reviewed them really, about the arts program and about recreational facilities. I think it's kind of a good place to bring in parks. So some of those we've already reviewed, but there would be some additional ones to look at, just a few of them. On the tourism and economic vitality, I think we really want to look at some policies for that. And then we talked about historical resources, and they were included in the land use, and we've looked at conservation of archaeological resources in the conservation element. So I think for that element, it's really kind of pulling those and kind of packaging it a little differently. So I actually don't see any new policies, but we can kind of bring them forward again and look at them. So those are the new elements.
And that'll be at the next meeting. Part of our next meeting.
Part of our next meeting, right? So it's kind of really to just kind of wrap it up. We'll bring back these circulation element programs that we talked about tonight, and then do the vision statement, and then we're done. And then what we want to do is start draft the general plan, and then bring back the draft to the TAG in the April and May meeting.
So we have a March, April, May meeting, and is there in my brief conversation the other day with Nathan, is there a scheduled date for a town workshop that's between the April and May, or date?
Yeah, it's in April
26th.
26th.
Okay, April 26th.
The next community workshop.
Community workshop.
And
okay.
Before then, we'll have 2 different town council study sessions.
Right, as well as 2 TAG meetings before the community workshop.
Right.
Okay.
And what happened with the community meeting with the veterans?
That's scheduled for the April 25th. And we're also holding a focus session with the business community.
Oh, good.
Could you please just notify us by email when there's all these other meetings, because if I have an opportunity, I'd attend the veterans one or other ones, just to give us a heads up on schedule and time, so as the group members can attend if they'd like, for not to comment, but just to be present and to listen to the conversation.
Yeah. I would like, because it's a good segue into it, take this opportunity just to remind everyone that envisionyountville.com, right at the top of the tab, there's a section for meetings. If you click on it, we have this calendar that talks about not only the town advisory group meetings, but also those town council study sessions we were talking about, special workshops, and other community workshops. So highly encourage everyone to sync your calendars with this. Go in and add these. That this is a really helpful resource.
Good.
Can I make a comment on the town council study sessions? You know, we've had an incredible, whatever it is, 6 months of going through this, and it's been a lot of work for us. And I think we realized there was so much information, and we sort of figured out how you could present it to us so that we could absorb it and then be able to react to it and make thoughtful comment. I'm so worried about the presentation to the town council that it will be done in such a way that they can also be able to absorb and appreciate the conversations, the back and forth, the discussions, the intensity, the emotion about it, and that it's not just a 2-hour check session, but that there is more depth of background, particularly as you were pointing out some of the controversial issues, but that they are given the time and the ability to absorb in the same way that we were given the time and the ability to absorb. So I think otherwise the work here will not be as appreciated or understood or taken into consideration in the way that they should be able to be allowed to do it.
So we've actually scheduled 2 town council meetings, and they're both 3 hours. So we're talking about 6 hours of discussion time that we scheduled. And what we really want to focus are the land use, kind of the major land use issues, because what we want to do is make sure we have kind of the policies right before we bring them to the workshop in April. We also just want to present them, let them see all of the other policies and programs. Not that we want to kind of go through those one by one, but we just wanted to be sure that the council and the ZDRB had the opportunity to kind of review them and flag anything that was of concern or they felt like we were missing. So when we finally have our draft after the workshop, then we're going to be bringing it back through all of the committees, and will eventually get to the council, and they will be able to do kind of a line-by-line review of everything. So this is a long process, is what I'm trying to say here. And
I just want to add, Liz, based on your comment, I want to assure you that the council is regularly watching, and they're going back and looking at the archives because they have a strong interest. So I want to really, it's a great opportunity to share that. The other thing that we're also doing by having this check-in before we get too far ahead is, and I think you said it very eloquently, you've been noodling on this and you've been wrestling with this and putting it all together. Well, we got to get them up to speed with where you're at so that then they can digest that, have and understand it before they move into the next public process. So I just really want to reinforce with you that they're being very respectful of the process. And for many of you that know our council, not being here in the back of the room is really difficult for them. And they are very appreciative. And I know on a regular basis, just because of the commentary I have with them, that they're watching, they're hearing the discussion, they're agreeing with some. I hear some, oh yeah, and then I hear some, where did they come up with that? But anyway, that's all part of the process. And we realize, well, we need to bring them in because you've been having 8 or 9 months of this, and they can't absorb it all in one meeting. And we don't want to do that to them. But we do need to bring them in, and you know, we have the ability. So that is something, to your point, staff's very conscious of, the team's working on. How do we present them? The very good news is that the council's been following, the community's following, the worksheets, the meeting structure. So we need them to ask the questions that some of you have asked, and then we're able to explain and say, yes, this is what you looked at. It's a split vote. You know, the community's interested in this. The good news is there's a lot of consensus. So when you talk about a lot of consensus, and if there's an outlier position or something, then the council can weigh in that, or if a council member has an outlier position, because the other thing one needs to remember is there's 5 of them. And they may not all agree on every individual plank that's in the general plan, but at the end of the day, I think they're going to take all of your work, the various feedback from the appropriate boards and commissions, and then they're going to hear from people, because we've got several more community workshops, and then they mix that all together and we'll vote on it. But I definitely want to stress to all of you that they really, really are appreciative of the hard work you're doing. They know that it's challenging and not easy, and they're very appreciative of what you're doing.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any other moving to item 7 in terms of, since we moved there, commissioner or staff comments? Our next meeting would be at 6 p.m. on March 8th. Is that correct? Is that the second Tuesday? Okay. Just briefly, I just would want to report that not last council meeting, but the council meeting, I think before that, Boyd and I and Liz and Whitney were at the council meeting, and we made just a short presentation about the status of our discussion, and they were very positive and thanked us for coming to give them a report. Do you have any other comments about that? No. Good. And so the last comment is I believe I wanted to thank Liz. I believe this is your last meeting. And for Liz Howard, and so we want to thank you, and we appreciate all your comments and the passion you brought to this committee, and we wish you well. And so thank you very much. Thank you. So.
Before you say anything.
It's hard. We are sorry to see you go before the end of this process, so we're going to give you an early acknowledgement and thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much. Envision Yountville.
Christine will have to wait unless you move.
Yeah. we won't look.
See how it just illustrates how important it is that agriculture is in our vision statement.
That's right, exactly.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's really been a privilege to serve on this, and for my husband and myself, it was a hard decision to leave Yountville, but it's just the next chapter for us. But I will hold all of you very close, and we'll continue to watch. I can watch the tapes.
You can get on your computer and watch our meetings.
And thank you for allowing me to be part of it. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good. So if there is no other comments, then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Second, all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much, and I'll see everyone back on the 8th of March.